Welcome to the Boulder Criminal Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Elena Nicole, and today I'm here with Ian McDavid. Ian is a Boulder-based criminal defense attorney who has represented thousands of clients and taken over 40 cases to jury trial. And in this episode, we'll be breaking down the real-world legal side of DUI, from what actually happens during a traffic stop to how these cases are built, challenged, and decided on in court. So Ian, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Let's dive right in.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Elena.
Let's talk a little bit about blood tests in DUI cases. We touched on them, but let's go a little bit deeper. So how are blood test results used in DUI prosecutions? And where in the process do defense attorneys most often find vulnerabilities with them?
So blood tests, they're ubiquitous. If the driver selects blood, they get to take that blood test. The neat thing about blood tests is that it pumps out you get two different vials of blood. One of them is the state's and one of them is yours. And the state keeps both of them. But when you get arrested for that DUI and you got to wait like 6 months for them to get the blood tested, but when it's eventually done, you then have the option to retest it. So if it's close or it's borderline, you get to go look for that retesting of the blood. Now, the downside of blood testing is that it's way more accurate and it's going to include a lot more information than just what you might get from that breath test. So a blood test is going to show prescription drugs, illegal drugs, recreational drugs, all that stuff they're going to get, as well as just your BAC.
So if someone is to get pulled over and they opt in for the breathalyzer because they know they haven't consumed alcohol or a low amount, but they have been, there's THC or there's something else in their blood and they know that, would a police officer ever require both?
Could a police officer try to break the law? Yeah, absolutely they could. But there's something that we would do about it if they did, and that would be to try to suppress those results. So it kind of goes back to your earlier question of like, well, do you argue with the police officer? It's like, no, you don't argue with the police officer. You say, no, I don't consent, and you politely and respectfully fight back against them, but you don't stop them because you've already taken one test. Instead, you wait and you hire a good lawyer and you get your case thrown out.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. In your experience, have you ever seen anything like blood samples fermenting in storage or readings showing up incorrectly because of mishandling or something like that happening?
Yeah, I've had some where like the blood, they couldn't test it because the blood sample was like too thick and runny. They didn't know why, nobody knew why, but there was some issue with the vial, and the blood came out not in a way that could be tested, and so they ended up having to throw out the case, which was wonderful.
Interesting. Okay. And then does a person have a right to use an independent lab to retest their blood sample? And how does a defense attorney obtain that?
Yeah, a person has a right to have their blood retested. It's actually really straightforward. You just have your lawyer reach out to the lab to do the form. There's a form we all fill out. I don't do it in every case because, again, if it seems like it's not going to be a close thing, it's probably not worth spending the time on it. But on those close cases, I've definitely gotten those blood tests retested and come back a little bit lower, which was good, or sometimes a little bit higher, which is not good either. But what's great is knowing for sure what that other test result is.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to the blood tests in DUI cases, is there anything else that you think it would be helpful for people to know that they may not?
With respect to blood tests, I think it would be helpful for people to just know that they should be thinking about the time that it takes for those tests to get done. They should be thinking about, is there anything else in their system that they don't want law enforcement knowing? And that's actually a two-way street, right? So if you're wrongfully accused of a DUI, which, believe me, it happens, right? It's sometimes people are just different, and law enforcement doesn't get that, and then they think you're impaired because you talk a little different, right? Or you've had a long day and you slur your words. So if you're sober and they want you to take the test, don't refuse because of the injustice, right? Jump on that, prove them wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes complete sense. So let's talk about first-time DUI offenses, what to realistically expect. So we talked about the process kind of if you're to get pulled over in the beginning of the call. So is there anything in the journey that would look different if it's your first-time offense versus if it's, your second, third? So
starting out, pretty much every DUI, the investigation itself rolls the same way when you're on scene, when you're at your car, and when you're at the police department. But after that, once they figure out how many you've had before, it actually gets pretty different pretty quick. So your first time offender, likely not going to have any kind of bond conditions. They're likely going to be given a summons, which is just, sort of show up at court on this date. And then they go to that summons. They might have to deal with some pretrial services or something like that from the judge if it's a pretty serious first offense, but not everybody does. Second offenses, third offenses, fourth offenses, everything else past that, and it gets more, serious. The more serious your penalties are, or the more number of priors you have, they start to add more layers of supervision, right? Your second and your third, those stay misdemeanors, but they start to have mandatory jail time associated with it. It's 10 days for your 10 days for your second, 60 days for your third. I will tell you that people on their third offenses usually do not just get 60 days. Usually they get a much worse penalty than that, because by the time you're on your third, it's pretty clear that there's a problem that normal methods aren't correcting. Of course, your fourth and everyone after your fourth is a felony. It's a class 4 felony.
Yeah. And what happens when it comes to your license, with each layer of that?
So every time you get a DUI, your license basically gets resuspended. You can generally get an interlock and stay in those classes in order to keep that. But it's real common for people to end up in a position where they lose their license and they just cannot get it back because they pick up a DUI, then they go driving when they're not supposed to. They get caught driving when they're not supposed to. And remember, we live in a day and age now where there are flock cameras everywhere. So proving that somebody has been driving when they're not supposed to is pretty quickly going to be trivial. And again, you do that, you get caught, you lose your license, and people end up in these spirals where, decades go by and they just cannot drive because of poor choices that they made real short in time, in their young, stupid days.
Yeah, absolutely. What are the most common mistakes that you see that first-time offenders make either the night of or the weeks right after the arrest that end up hurting their case?
Again, setting aside the obvious of putting themselves in that position in the first place, because it is a preventable thing to do. And the best thing to do, if you're listening to this advice, is to listen to that part of the advice.
Yeah.
But if we're in part B anyway, I'd be respectful, be polite, try to not be the worst part of that police officer's night.
Yeah.
Recognize that you're, and I certainly recognize that there's a lot of privilege that is speaking right now in terms of how you get to interact with law enforcement. But as much as you can, be polite, as much as you can, be respectful, right? Because when the prosecutor in your case is talking to the judge about how you behaved, you probably want them to say they were cooperative instead of you wanting them to say, they said a bunch of horrible things about the police officer, right? Because it's not going to help you, and it's only going to make things worse.
Yeah. Is there anything else that people wouldn't think of outside of, what we've talked about, that they can do kind of their lifestyle? Is there anything, like, as far as they're going to be required to do that work afterwards, but say in the meantime, they have this arrest. Is there anything that you've actually seen be helpful when it comes to work or volunteering or anything that can help their case?
Yeah, so especially with a first DUI, and this is true for all of them, right? But for a first, the courts look at your first DUI as, they're really dangerous, right? And that's why they treat them really seriously. Is the difference between a first DUI and extreme indifference murder is quite literally what happened, right? Like it's potentially the same behavior. So courts look at that and they want to see how a person reacts. Your first DUI, a lot of people get them. It's a mistake. It's not something that you need to judge somebody over, so long as nobody gets hurt, right? Yeah. But judges are going to look for, are you taking it seriously? And taking a DUI seriously means stop drinking, right? Like make that life change pretty much right away. Go volunteer. The required volunteer hours, most jurisdictions will let you do them early. Yeah. And so you can go pick whatever place you like. Pick, trail maintenance, pick a humane society, pick a soup kitchen, whatever is good for you, and start doing those hours ahead of time. Make sure that the people will count them for you and certainly keep track of them. But I've never had an issue with a client doing their community service early. The other thing on that front, and this is one of those weird sort of synergies where the administrative law kind of requires good behavior on behalf of people who get in trouble for DUI, because if you want to keep driving and you have to have either and you've refused or you've had a high test or something like that, they make you get an interlock to get your car driving. They also make you take the classes that you would need to do for your penalty anyway. So it works out in this kind of weird way where getting really proactive in terms of fixing your license, getting back on the road, those things end up working out well for you in the criminal case anyway. And the best days in court are when I'm showing up there with a client who's like, yep, I had a problem and made some bad choices. Here's what I've done to fix it. I understand that I can't do this again, and I'm not going to. And judges oftentimes can really hear and tell when that's a serious or a not serious thing to say.
Absolutely. Yeah, those are great tips there. Let's talk ballpark cost. What does it look like? Of course, this is going to be a range. What have you seen typically for a first time offense versus, if it's your second or third? What are we looking at as far as ballpark cost?
We are talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, right? Not only do do you have to and should pay a lawyer to help you work your case out? And that's usually like the biggest single chunk cost.
Yeah.
But that's not the biggest cost by far, because anybody who's got this DUI, they've got to go to those classes. Those classes are not free. The therapy sessions, you've got to do 24 of them. Those aren't free either. The drug testing, the alcohol testing that you do on probation, where they make you go take these randoms, you got to pay for those. And this can add up. I mean, the number of $10,000 does not strike me as a wrong number. The number 13 or 14 or 15 also doesn't really strike me as a wrong number. It depends a lot on the person and their circumstances, of course, but these are expensive mistakes.
And that's first. We're talking first offense in this situation?
Yep.
Okay. And
Yep.
what does it look like typically if you're, maybe it's your second or third?
Well, number one, your legal fees go up because we now have to litigate a lot more carefully, right? We have to be a lot more careful about now we go from talking about minimums to going to talk about like, well, how do we figure out a sentence that isn't awful for the person, right?
Wow.
And so your legal fees go up, your supervision time goes up because people aren't really being supervised for 1 year on their second or 1 year on their third. They get more time to be supervised, and a lot of places, and I've seen the price vary, but it's like $1,200 a year for felony level supervision, right? In Colorado, I think it's $750 for a misdemeanor, and most DUIs are misdemeanor. But even that, you're doing 2 years of probation. That's was that like $1,450 or $1,500 for just for that supervision, not the lawyer, not the court costs, not the court fees, any of that.
Yeah. That's good. That's good to know. Wow, this has been a great conversation. Is there anything else that you think would be really helpful for people to know that we didn't cover kind of in these little categories of topics when it comes to DUI?
No, I think I covered it.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, thanks, Ian. Again, this was a great conversation. Thanks to everyone listening, and we'll see you next time.
Likewise.